Hello, it's Chloe Bruce, the journalist, the guest journalist once again. Today I wanted to discuss something that's a bit adjacent to the whole subject of mental health, but not if you know some parts of the internet and the way they describe schizophrenia. I'm wondering if people aren't taking too much from what would be considered the dark web when it comes to the description of people with mental health conditions, and in my case, my diagnosis of schizophrenia. And it's on the internet that I see descriptions of people with schizophrenia as though they've never thrived. And I've discussed my diagnosis of schizophrenia and somewhat my career in previous videos. And today I'd just like to say a bit about my education, which helps map you into my childhood. Because in some of these descriptions of people with schizophrenia, they seem to describe children that literally don't bear any resemblance to anything living or dead. Something that literally sort of never goes out of the house and is just bizarre and never thrives and never does anything. So I thought I'd discuss my education and how that to show that you can sort of have a normal-ish childhood, and I wouldn't call parts of my childhood normal when it's other people's abnormalities. But anyway, I'll just you'll see what I mean when I talk. Thank you. So after my diagnosis of schizophrenia, I was confused about what it actually was and why they said I fitted this particular diagnosis. I had had below par cognition at times, for relatively short periods of time, but I had experienced poor cognition, unusually poor cognition, as I might say, which they do say is a feature of schizophrenia, namely cognitive impairment. But I think these cognitive impairments may have been undiagnosed seizures, because I have discussed in earlier videos on my channel how I was diagnosed with epilepsy around 3 years after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. The schizophrenia, the epilepsy diagnosis, however, did not negate the schizophrenia diagnosis as you might expect, but getting my epilepsy under control with an anti-epileptic medication helped me place what might have been seizures, in my case, in some of my symptoms, as opposed to psychosis as a fact unto itself. I've said that UK psychiatry cannot possibly fix the psychiatrically unwell without considering co-occurring conditions, and including using the machinery needed to diagnose these co-occurring conditions. I've seen online descriptions of people with schizophrenia as a sort of societal no-hoper, someone who has always ailed, and descriptions of them failing also in childhood. So I thought I would discuss here my biography in terms of my education, and you'll see that I did actually hit all the milestones after all. Although I was both sexually and emotionally abused as a child, I did manage to pass all my exams and get into university. My primary school education was primarily in a state school where I was emotionally bullied but never physically. At the age of 8, the form teacher turned out to be a paedophile. One social worker I confided in at the time, but in an informal context, said that's just because he can't get a girlfriend, and as such I have never really had support for this. I was not particularly academic at primary school, though I did pass most of my lessons on the whole, but I was anxious about socialising in the playground or at school dinners. That said, I was lucky enough later to spend my final 2 terms of primary school in a really wonderful private school, and the school report said nice things about me. I did not pass my 11 plus because my parents kept me off school that day. I did enjoy parts of my childhood, such as ballet and drama and music, and in particular the piano. It was an okay childhood, but I had a lot of anxiety to at school. My parents sent me to a private senior school in central London that by its own admission did not want its pupils to be academic, but rather what they would see as a feisty, well-rounded type in terms of character. But the fact is, if you don't get a job at the end of it, how do you eat, drink and pay your rent? I was put in the bottom group for maths, French and chemistry, and at GCSE level I nevertheless passed all 9 GCSEs that I took. I took 9 GCSEs and passed them all. I had A's in French and Russian, B in maths and English language, and 5 C's in physics, chemistry, English literature, music and history. I did actually do the higher paper in all subjects, although I was going to put into the lower paper, but managed to argue my case. It was difficult focusing on my studies more than I had, because I was also sexually abused during this time, for example on a school trip. I did not like the school, so I opted to do my A-levels at a state school and was very pleased with the teaching at this school. And I was very happy there, and socially I was very happy. I did A-level French and got a C, I did English literature and got a B, and I did Russian AS and got an A. But I'd also done music A-level for a year but dropped out for various reasons, although it remains my favourite subject. I spent my 2 gap years working in Greece and Moscow, but I had my first job at the age of 15 at GKN, which I think was an arms company. I opted for a BA in Russian Studies at London University and graduated with a first class with distinction. And the distinction was awarded for my oral Russian, that is my spoken Russian. Of course, it helped that I'd spent time in Moscow, in Russia as it were, during my gap years. I won 2 scholarships after my BA for an MSc at the London School of Economics, where I studied Russian politics, and this included some Russian history, but from the government point of view. And I was awarded a high merit, enough to help me get into a PhD course, or rather a doctorate course, later on. I also worked as a translator from Russian to English. After university, I went straight into business journalism and really enjoyed my job and the opportunity to learn German, that is other languages. But I had my psychotic episode, which I have discussed in an earlier video some years into this career as a journalist. I took some time out, as you might expect, and once I had stabilised enough, I returned to work on a doctorate in Russian gas politics and published widely on the subject. The working hours of the doctorate were slightly kinder than journalism and more flexible, but also the Austrian scholarship that I was awarded for my doctorate was enough to live and rent in Vienna, as well as to pay for subscriptions I needed for some of my sources. Once I had submitted my thesis, I started to work as a freelance journalist. I had never freelanced much before, but this was a job as a freelance journalist, but the pay would have been difficult for a longer term contract, even though I was adding my experience and expertise into my articles. I had to opt out because I developed a serious viral infection, which I have discussed in earlier videos, and at this point the mental health part of things researched, although longer term there was an amelioration in my epilepsy symptoms. I would discuss some of the traumas I have suffered in later videos, and by traumas I mean traumatic experiences that I've had in life that I addressed and still have to address. Thank you.